Welcome back, all you beautiful people, right here on your Feel Good Breakfast show on SABC3. Happy World Sleep Day if you have been missing out on the show this morning. Now, when it comes, or it seems like we do not have enough hours in the day, because often that does happen, sleep is often neglected. Now, what we tend to forget is how important sleep is for our overall health and our well-being. Now, Dr. Dale Rae, sleep scientist and director of sleep science at the University of Cape Town, joins us this morning to answer our burning questions on sleep, from why it's important to what exactly happens during sleep paralysis, and are naps really bad for you? And I think that's a question you want to know. But if you have any questions at home, head on over to our social media pages and let us know what you think about this conversation. Expresso Morning Show, SABC3. Happy World Sleep Day, Dr. Rae.
Thanks very much for having me.
Is that a thing? Should we say Happy World Sleep Day?
Well, I do think it's important to try and think about it and raise awareness around sleep.
And that's exactly why you're here. We are excited to learn all of these questions. But the first question that everyone wants to know is, how much should one sleep at night to function optimally the next day?
Okay, so I know no one's going to like this answer, but I'm going to give you the raw truth, and then we can take it from there. So the recommendations are currently that adults in our age range, so up to about 65, need 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night. But hold on a second, let me just qualify this a little bit before you have a complete heart attack. So the recommendations actually are not that every human must get 8 hours, because a lot of people think that's the magic number to aim for. But they actually say that there's a continuum of how much sleep we need, and that my sleep need is different to your sleep need. So you might be a shorter sleeper, I might be a longer sleeper, and it's really important to figure that out and to go with it. But they also say that for some people, 6 hours is sufficient, and for other people, 10 is necessary. So it's actually a good old bell-shaped distribution, and we all have very, very different sleep needs. And you might find that your sleep need even changes. For example, in winter, have you ever noticed that you need a little bit more sleep than in summer? Yeah. And when we're sick, obviously, we need a little bit more sleep, and sometimes when we're a bit more stressed. But it definitely changes in different circumstances. And the important thing to remember is that those 7 to 9 hours is the sleep that you need for optimal physical health and mental health and optimal daytime functioning.
It's so weird, though, and I can actually relate, because sometimes you'll sleep 4 hours and you'll feel so fresh in the morning, and sometimes you'll sleep 8 hours and be more tired than anything. But what happens if you don't get that optimal amount of hours in the night?
Okay, that's a really good question. So once off here and there, absolutely no problem. But over time, we accumulate something called sleep debt. So if you're continually missing your
debt?
Yeah.
Okay.
Think about financial debt. So if you're continually missing your sleep target and continually being underslept, you go into something called sleep debt. And your body monitors that. It's actually relatively generous, and it writes off a large amount of that debt. But over time, eventually it decides this and this is not enough. And it'll either force you to crash one way or another so that you can do some catching up. But much more important than that are the long-term consequences of insufficient sleep. And this, I think, is what we're only beginning to learn about right now. So we know that over many, many years, if we don't get enough sleep or enough good quality sleep, that we're at increased risk for heart disease, for metabolic disease like diabetes. We're more likely to have weight gain, and then there's a number of cognitive decline issues that go along with lack of sleep as well. And so I think it's tricky, because sleep's really easy to abuse. We can abuse it today like crazy, but the knock-on effects we're only going to probably really feel 10 years down the line or so.
And then, doctor, what are the signs of sleep deprivation, for example, if you feel like you haven't had sufficient sleep, or you are actually in sleep debt in that phase?
Yeah, so there's a number of things I ask people to check for. I mean, the most obvious thing is your daytime function. At the end of the day, we don't really care about what happens at nighttime. We go to sleep, we expect our bodies to do their thing, and we want to wake up feeling refreshed. And then throughout the day, you want to be on your A game. So at the end of the day, if you have insufficient sleep, you'll find that things like you can't multitask so well. You might start to forget things. Your short-term memory begins to get impaired. You might find that you are just wishing desperately for a nap at any time of the day, even if you've literally just woken up. You'll find your mood starts to go. You're a lot more less tolerant, more grumpy. Some people experience that more seriously in forms of depression, for example. So a number of these things sort of start to rack up. And one of the sure signs, or two of the sure signs, are firstly, if you fall asleep within 5 minutes. So it feels efficient, head hits the pillow, gone, great. But actually, that's a sign that you're falling asleep too quickly. Should take 5 to 20 minutes to fall asleep. So that's a sign that you're in sleep debt. And one of the other things is that when you have free days, days when you don't need to be at work or you've got no commitments, if you extend your sleep by more than an hour and a half, say, that's called catch-up sleep. And that's another sure sign that what you're doing during the week or your regular sleep patterns are probably insufficient for you.
I want to get into a bit about that a bit later on, but also about insomnia and sleep deprivation. But we're going to continue this conversation in part 2 of our sleep day chat. It is World Sleep Day here on your Feel Good Breakfast Show. So connect with us again if you have any questions for Dr. Rae. She'll be back a little later on.
It's my Feel Good Breakfast Show.
Welcome back to your Feel Good Breakfast Show. This is Expresso right here on SABC 3. Thank you so much for choosing to start your morning with us right here. Now, happy World Sleep Day to everyone watching right now. We are joined by Dr. Dale Rae, who is a sleep scientist and director of sleep science at the University of Cape Town, who's going to help us unpack this, our sleeping patterns and the importance to get sufficient sleep at night.
Yeah, I think the one thing when people think sleep and disorders of it is always insomnia and sleep paralysis. So like, what is insomnia? What does it mean?
Okay, so insomnia is the most common sleep disorder for sure. People usually have a problem trying to fall asleep, or otherwise they can fall asleep fine, but they can't maintain sleep. Have you ever noticed that somewhere between about 1 and 3 in the morning, you wake up, and if you've got a racing mind or things on your mind or you're feeling stressed or anxious, you often can't go back to sleep again. That's very common. And then the third type is when you wake up too early. So you might wake at 3 or 4 in the morning and then you're unable to go back to sleep again. So insomnia is really tricky, and it's actually quite debilitating because its knock-on effects on your daytime fatigue are massive. And the trick with insomnia, or the way that we think about it now, is that it's not so much a condition. It's not that I catch or I get or I have insomnia or I am an insomniac, but rather something else is causing the symptoms of you being unable to sleep or to maintain sleep. And so when it comes to resolving insomnia, it's really, really important that you have to do a bit of digging to figure out what's happening which can cause me not to sleep. It could be a physiological or biological reason, and it could be a psychological reason. There are any number of things that could have triggered it. And it can be short-term. Many of us will have 1 or 2 nights of insomnia. I'm sure that you can relate to that pesky mosquito or some nasty work deadline which has kept you up at night, and that's fine. We just go with that. If that happens once or twice every now and then, no problem. But it's the chronic insomnia that we're much more concerned about. And 10 to 15% of people have chronic insomnia. And so it really is a debilitating condition.
And what are some other types of sleep disorders that are out there, most common ones? And also, how can they be how can you actually spot that this is a sleeping disorder?
Sure. So the second most common sleeping disorder is a breathing-relating sleep disorder called obstructive sleep apnea. Many people don't know about it, and in fact, 80% of people that have apnea don't even know that they have it, so it's underdiagnosed. So what happens is at nighttime, you'll be snoring away. So if you're a big snorer, you could well have apnea. And the next thing is you'll stop breathing because your upper airways collapse, and then your body shoots out adrenaline, forces you to gasp or snort, and you start breathing again. And that can happen 10, 15, 20, 30 times an hour. And what it does is it creates incredibly shallow, disrupted sleep, which has excessive or knock-on effects on your daytime sleepiness, but it puts huge strain on your cardiovascular system. And that's what we're mostly worried about in the long term.
Yeah. It's also like with your activity during the day, I feel like when you're very busy during the day, you struggle to fall asleep. Why does this happen? Like, does it mean that if you're having a chill day, you're going to go to bed better? But if you have a more active day, you struggle at night?
So it just depends what you mean by active. But if you mean active as in mentally, busy, exactly, then we can just be overstimulated. And I mean, you think about kids that are overstimulated, we're never going to get them to sleep. So it's much the same for us. So in order to be able to flick that switch and to go into a decent sleep, we really need to have quite a calm, come down space, and we need to be able to relax. And I think one of the primary reasons that people struggle with sleep is that they have too much stress or too much anxiety or too much on their mind, and they literally are holding too much stuff. And often during the daytime, as we suppress all of that because we're busy, we've got to do a whole lot of things. But at nighttime, when you sort of start to sleep, then everything that's in your subconscious comes up, it bubbles up, and it starts to create worry or concern. And so that can make it really hard for you to relax. Because in order to sleep, you essentially need to let your guard down. You need to be completely vulnerable so that you can have good sleep.
On that note, we're gonna expand a little much more on it. Especially, I want to know about sleep paralysis, what it is, why it happens to you, especially when you are taking a nap. But we'll continue that conversation with Dr. Dale Rae a little later on, just shedding some light on the importance of sufficient sleep.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
We are still continuing the conversation with Dr. Dale Rae, our sleep scientist and director of sleep science at Cape Town University, talking all things sleep. I am freaked out about our conversation now. We are talking about sleep paralysis, and it's the wildest thing. I never knew that it existed, because for me, I always thought, there's a saying in Afrikaans, die spook druk jou. It's when you lay in your back and you fall asleep and then you wake up in such a panic, but that is what sleep paralysis is, right?
Yeah, so generally what happens is it happens when you're transitioning from wake to sleep, or it can go the other way around, from sleep to wake. And you'll suddenly get the sensation that you can't move at all, can't move a muscle, but your brain is active. And it's incredibly frightening when it happens for the first time, because you don't necessarily know what's going on. Some people say that they'll feel a pressure on their chest and that maybe they can't breathe. And other people might even say that out the corner of their eye, they see something in the room, like something that shouldn't be there. So they're starting to maybe even hallucinate. And sleep paralysis is relatively uncommon, and it's actually quite benign as far as we know, but it's a very frightening thing to go through. And so the thinking is that once you understand it and you can recognize it, you can almost allow yourself to say, okay, I know what you are, you're going to pass, and I'm going to be okay. But I think things just to know is that people who suffer from sleep paralysis will notice, for example, that it happens more often when they're very stressed or when they've had quite a lot of acute sleep deprivation. And sometimes people who suffer from a condition called narcolepsy also suffer from sleep paralysis.
Oh, wow, because I experience sleep paralysis, I think, more often than a normal person should. And it's quite scary, but I'm at a point where now I know what it is, I'm aware, and I allow time for it to... It's very frightening. Yeah. But does it come with sleeping positions, you know? And also, the different sleeping positions, is it related to a personality?
So sleep paralysis typically happens when we're on our back. And then in terms of general sleeping position, I mean, the real rule of thumb is if it works for you, you're comfortable, it doesn't really matter how you sleep. You can literally be upside down, and that's absolutely fine. Unless, however, you're a snorer. So snorers generally will find that they'll do a lot more snoring when they're on their back, so they're better off if they sleep on their side. And some people who suffer from, who either have a lot of obesity, then they generally need to be quite propped up, because sometimes that can make breathing very difficult at nighttime. And then you'll know if you're suffering from allergic rhinitis or postnasal drip, it's very, very difficult to sleep flat on your back then, and then you often need to be up a little bit more just to allow drainage.
Any final words to get a good night rest? Because we all need it. We have busy schedules. In your opinion, what is a good night rest?
Sure. So I think the first thing is to recognize that sleep's really important for you and for your health and well-being, and to get to a position where you're able to prioritize it. I think that's the hardest thing. It's so easy to abuse sleep. And so once you can prioritize it, it makes everything else fall in place. So you need to decide, how much time do I need to sleep approximately? What should that timing look like? So if you're a morning person, you definitely want to have an early bedtime and an early wake-up time. And if you're a night owl, you want to have the opposite. And then you need to just be careful with the things that you do during the day so that you can foster great sleep. So if you're very sensitive to caffeine, you obviously want to be avoiding caffeine in the latter part of the day. There's some people who have no problem with caffeine, and so that's fine. You want to make sure that you're not eating too close to bedtime. So a good 2-hour gap between your last meal and sleep is a good idea. If you do evening training sessions, exercise, you don't want to exercise too close to bed. You know what it's like. You feel all amped and everything, and it's hard to come down. And then I think possibly the most important thing these days is devices, for 2 reasons. So it's the control of devices towards at the end of the day. So firstly, our devices emit a really bright light, generally, and that can suppress a hormone called melatonin. And if we don't have melatonin come up at the end of the day, we don't get the signal that it's time to go to bed, and we don't feel sleepy. And so it's the light that's coming off our devices, which is really important. But the other thing is actually just that devices are a massive distraction. And so not only do you think, oh, just one more series episode. Let me just watch. So Netflix is a great thing.
Let it go.
Yeah, let it go.
Let it go.
Absolutely. But the other thing is that if you accidentally look at that last work email just before you winding down to go to bed, and now you're riled up and you're concerned about tomorrow, that's it. You're going to have a shocker. And so really creating a buffer, a good hour space of time where you do your favorite thing in the world. It doesn't matter what it is. It might be watching a series. It might be reading. It might be chatting to someone. It might be having a bath. Are we allowed to bath these days? I'm not sure. But you just want to be absolutely relaxed, do your favorite things so that you give yourself the best possible chance to transition into good sleep.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning. It's actually a pleasure having you and shedding some light on this very important topic that is very easy to disregard. And I hope that today, World Sleep Day, we have helped you to snap back into healthy sleeping patterns. Right now, we're going to take a quick ad break. But when we come back, there's so much more right here on your Feel Good Breakfast Show.